Hello, Aharja. Welcome to Stories, Legends and Wonders of Aran. Aran is also known as Inis Mór, the largest of the three Aran Islands. I'm Dara Malloy, Dara Ómé Lia as Gaeilge. Hello everybody. Today I'm bringing you on a beautiful September evening to see the monastic site of Saint Surnai. She's the only woman saint commemorated on this island of Inis Mór. We have Saint Gobnet on Inis Mór, but we have Saint Surnai on Inis Mór. And to find her, you must come out the low road from Kilronan heading towards Dunangus. You pass through the townland of Monastery and into Eochaill, which we are in now. And just behind me here is the recycling plant. So now you know where you are. And there's a gate on my right here. And also there's a signpost here, which is meant to point to St. Surnai's monastic site. But unfortunately, the sign has gone off the top of the pole. But the pole is still here. So that'll be another cue for you. So you come in this gate here, or if you want, you can cross over the stile, which is just down beside the post here. And so let's head on up. As we walk here now, you can see St. Surnai's church in the distance. It's about halfway up the hill, but it's a good walk. It's surprising to see here as we walk up to St. Surnai's the presence of blooming primroses. As you probably know, primroses normally are one of the first flowers to bloom in early spring. You see them in March around here. But now it's late September and here's one or two still blooming. So here we have the lovely church of St. Surnai. She and her other fellow monks, I suppose you'd call them, or nuns, whatever you prefer, obviously built this church way back when they came here first, because, you know, there's many churches here on the island, but most of them that are still visitable have been adapted and adjusted and, generally speaking, made bigger over the course of centuries. And so, like St. Kieran's church, Temple Huron, or the seven churches are sort of great big churches. But the further you go back in the history of the Celtic monastic movement, the smaller the churches get. So this one dates back possibly even to the time of St. Surnai herself, because it is very tiny. It is 12 feet across and only 14 feet deep. So, you know, a small bedroom is really all it is. And when monks were building churches at that time, you're talking about the 6th, 7th century, they were building the church simply to accommodate their own community. And they never wanted their community to get bigger than the community that Jesus had. So, you know, 12 or 13 would be the absolute max. And when they come in here to pray, they're probably standing up, so they don't need a huge amount of room. And then, of course, possibly in those early days, they prayed outdoors most of the time and just gathered on the Sabbath to pray indoors. So maybe they only used it very, very sparingly. Nonetheless, the church is built on the style of all the Celtic monastic churches. Virtually all of them are facing east-west. So if you get lost on this island, find a church like this and you'll know where the west is, which is this side, and the east is where the altar is and where the window is above the altar. And then to the right of the church, of the altar, sometimes you'll find a window as well, which will catch the sun travelling through the southern sky during the day. One of the other features of this church, apart from its smallness, is that it's not exactly straight lines. If you look carefully, and I'll bring you in to look around now in a minute, the two larger walls, the one facing north and the one facing south, are sort of curved outward. They're sort of concave, as if there's a sort of a bulge on them, like they're pregnant or something. I don't know why that is, whether over time this is what happened or whether they built it with that in mind. And one of the things is that this early period of monasticism was a transition period, and the influence of Europe was coming in enough, for example, to promote Christianity, but not yet to promote all the new architecture that was developing across Europe. New architecture in Europe was straight lines, walls with straight lines and then a right angle and so a sharp corner, whereas traditionally in Ireland before Christianity, people lived in curved buildings. They lived in houses that were either circular or oval, and within these buildings were built within circular stone walls, cashels, and when early monasticism developed in Ireland, they used the same model. So if you look back at most of the hermit huts of this early period, you'll see they were built like egg-shaped, no square corners at all. And this is a sort of combination of the square corners and the curved edges, so it's interesting from that point of view. Now there are the remains of other buildings here as well. They're not that clearly evident because they're buried in grass and clay and so on, and this place has never been excavated. But I can say that in the past at least 2 cross-inscribed slabs were found here, and they're probably still there. You can probably see them there now, but I'm not going to try and dig them up to show you the cross on them. And also they found a quern stone here, which would be evidence of people crushing grain and so on, preparing grain to make bread and that type of thing. So, I mean, people had to live here, you know, whatever way they could. Even though they were nuns, they still had to grow their own food, and they had to grind it in some way and make bread and so on. So they were normal human beings in that sense with normal needs, and I'm sure they had to spend a lot of their time looking after themselves and making sure they had enough food, especially for the winter, apart from their praying and their spiritual lives. Now I want to bring you over underneath the crag, or the cliff if you like, to show you the Holy Well connected with St. Surnai, and to show you also the hawthorn tree, which marks the sacredness of this whole site. And people who came here to pray, and occasionally people who still come here to pray, will tie a ribbon on the tree to mark their intention. So there's a well in under here. Part of it is used for the animals, who can drink from the water that's available to them. But the well itself is tucked in underneath the rock where the animals can't get their heads in. Now it's not very clear here today, but it's in under there, where the animals can't get at it. So it's solely for human usage. And of course, being a holy well, it's not really the place you come to wash your clothes or to take domestic water for your home. It's a place where you come to pray and to be blessed by the sacredness of the water at the holy well. And then over here to the left is the sacred hawthorn tree, on which people can sometimes hang a rag or tie a rag onto it and leave an intention behind. So this is very common all over Ireland, that people, when they come to a sacred place outdoors, they find the hawthorn tree, which is usually there to mark the location of the sacred place, and they tie a ribbon on the tree if they happen to have one with them, and leave an intention for themselves. Now this notice here tells a little bit of the story. It's mostly in Irish, and the English piece has been a bit defaced. So let me translate the Irish for you. Temple as Surnai, they call it here, the Church of St. Surnai. It says it's fairly old, with a concave door on the west side, and the remains of a window on the east side. It's of interest that the altar and the walls around the altar are curved, and that there's a stone sticking out at the southern corner, of the roof. It could mean the church's name could mean the Church of the Vigils, because Surnai could mean vigils, or it could be after Saint Surnai or Saint Surnius, a nun who lived in the 5th century in County Galway. So that's all near enough to my research. I have discovered that that Saint Surnai was a cousin of Saint Colman McDuagh, and the two of them came from, if you like, their kingdom, which is just south of Galway on the south coast of Galway Bay. And it looks like they both came out here to the Aran Islands when they were young, because that would have been a practice of many young monks, male and female, to start off their monastic life, coming out to study under the tutelage of the monks of St. Enda, who were here since the late 5th century. And so they're very sort of the first generation of nuns and monks after St. Patrick and St. Enda. And it's quite likely that they had the disapproval of their parents and of the king and queen of their tribe, and because St. Patrick mentions that a lot of young people who wanted to become nuns and monks did so without the approval of their families. So maybe that's one of the reasons that they came out here as well, to get away from that judgmental looking down upon them. Anyway, they established themselves here to such an extent that they have left these marks on the landscape, and that's no small feat in itself, because it's 1500 years ago since St. Surnai was here, and there'll be very few of us around who will still be remembered in 1500 years' time. And yet St. Surnai and her cousin St. Colman are both remembered here. And then they only stayed here for a while, set up their monastery here, kept it running, or left it running, and went back to their own kingdom and founded their sort of more permanent structure back in their own kingdom. So St. Colman founded the wonderful monastery of Colman McDuagh, which is still visitable in County Clare, and it even has a wonderful round tower. And Kilmacduagh is now part of the Diocese of Galway, so even his name is still remembered. But Surnai also resettled down in her family's kingdom, and you can find her holy well and the remains of her major monastery there on the road between Kilcolgan and Kinvara. You'll see a sign for St. Surnai's well along that road to the right as you head towards Kinvara. So she's well remembered both in southern Galway, in the southern part of Galway Bay, and also on the western edge of Galway Bay on the Aran Islands. And it's because her life and his life, the Colman, her cousin's life, were so inspirational that people remembered them and they regarded them as saints of the time. And I think it's important for us to remember them too, and to maybe have a look more deeply into how they lived their lives and what inspired them then, because it could be the same thing that might inspire us today. These stories and all the other stories that are to be found on the Aran Islands can be found in my book Pocket Guide to Aran, Legends in the Landscape, and that's available from our website www.aislingpublications.com, with Aisling spelt AISLING, so aislingpublications.com. There's one other book there on your screen, The Globalization of God, Celtic Christianity's Nemesis, which was my first book that I wrote apart from the Pocket Guide. I wrote the Pocket Guide a long time before it. But this was, if you like, my first, I don't know, more intellectual, more academic type book. It's a study of history, really, and an interpretation of history to show how Christianity really emerged from Judaism, and how Christianity took on the idea of becoming a global church. To do that, it had to sort of be based in Rome as its sort of centre, with the Pope becoming, if you like, the CEO of the organisation, and equating himself to the Emperor of Rome, and the whole thing then became a very authoritarian structure. And that version of Christianity spread throughout the world, especially on the back of colonisation, which was the main way of spreading it. So it was spread by violence and by a lot of destruction and a lot of removal of indigenous spiritualities. That was the downside of it, that all the indigenous ways, if you like, discovering the divine in their lives and expressing that in their mythology and in their sacred practices were all wiped out, which was such a shame. It was a destruction of diversity. And I suppose the book focuses on one of those indigenous ways of practicing Christianity, which was the Celtic Christian tradition, a tradition steeped in its own Celtic spiritual background, which had many gods and goddesses. So a very different form of Christianity. So part of this storytelling that I call the globalization of God is the story of the wiping out of Celtic Christianity. It happened first where it had spread throughout Europe and in Britain, and it happened then much later back in Ireland, which had never been part of the Roman Empire. So it took longer to subject that to Rome, but it did in the end with the Norman invasion of Ireland in the 12th century. So if you're interested in history, you might like that book too.